Hey girls, and welcome to the Hey Girl podcast. I'm your host, Jenn Parker, and today my co-host, Bethany, is interviewing her mother, Melissa Blevins. Girls, you do not want to miss this podcast for a couple of reasons. One, super fun to hear from moms, always. And two, Melissa opens up about her battle with mental illness, about being a pastor's wife, about being a mom dealing with mental illness, and all the things that go along with that. So maybe you're someone who's walking that road right now. Maybe you have someone in your life who's walking that road. But either way, I promise that you will be encouraged and uplifted by hearing Melissa's story.
All right, ladies, I have a special guest here today, somebody who not only do I know her more than I have known other guests, but she definitely knows me more than anybody in this world because she gave life to me. Well, that and God, but this is someone that I affectionately call Mommy because she is my mom. So I want to introduce you to my dear mom, Mrs. Melissa Blevins. Can you say hello, Mom?
Hello, this is her mama here, a nervous wreck. But
it's true. I pulled some strings to get Mom here today. As in, Mommy, how much do you love me? Will you come on my podcast?
Yeah.
But honestly, part of why I asked you to be here today is I think that you just have a story and experiences that would really mean a lot for women to hear. And I know you haven't really talked publicly a whole lot, unless I'm not remembering right.
Just in front of kids. They don't intimidate me. I'll try to think of you as a kid right now.
I am a kid. I'm your kid.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this is somewhat publicly, but the nice thing about a podcast is you don't have to look into all the faces of people listening. You can just pretend you're talking to me.
Okay.
So let's start with giving people a little bit of background of who you are, where you came from. Where did you start? Where were you born? Tell us a little bit about your family and your upbringing.
Well, I was born in the woods of Maine. You had to know how to get there by looking for a rock. The roads weren't actually labeled. And I didn't ever travel very much out of the state of Maine. I have one sister, two brothers. My brother and I used to throw rocks at me and tease me, and I learned to run very fast. So I don't know what else to say. That's just kind of who I started as. Came to the Lord at age 10. My parents were not Christians until that particular time. So
I love the story of Papa and Nana coming to the Lord. So tell us a little bit about, especially Papa in particular, your dad. What was it like in your home before you all came to know Christ? And then just that really when each of you became a believer, which happened in a pretty small window of time, if I remember right.
Yes, it did. Yes. My dad was woodsman. He worked in the woods. He was rough, tough, and he also drank. He was, I would call, an alcoholic. And so there were some things I definitely saw in the first 10 years of my life that were less than pleasant. I remember kind of hollering, and I remember my mom one time got so mad at him, she threw a piece of wood and it went on the windshield, and they were going to claim it in insurance saying a tree fell on the car.
Nice.
However, I had one uncle that was a Christian, one of my father's brothers, and he kind of kept witnessing. I didn't like to go over and stay with my cousins. I was afraid I'd swear in my sleep or something, but all these phobias that you don't tell anybody about. But anyways, one evening, pastor and my uncle came to visit my dad. Now, he had heard it and refused it, didn't want anything to do with it, but that night God was ready to meet them, and both my mom, my dad, my older brother, and sister, who were up still, came to know the Lord that night. And needless to say, well, it doesn't happen this way with everybody, but it was like a total 360 in our home. My dad who drank, my dad who smoked, my dad who hollered, my dad who swore, the next morning wasn't the same person that when I went to bed that night. And it wasn't any time at all. He just quit all that, and he was very avid witness for the Lord because he was saved through visitation. He was very outspoken that way. And since I didn't hear about it because I was nicely gone to bed and tucked in,
swearing in your sleep.
Swearing in my sleep. Shh, don't tell anybody. Of course, we started going to church right away. And one day the pastor, I think my parents were saved in like March, and then May of that month, the pastor came and he said, I want to talk to you. So I don't know if little side steps. He talked to me. Now, I don't really remember a lot of what he said. I just remember that I did pray with him. And I went in, and my mother said, what is that big smile on your face about? And that's kind of the first indication that something had happened in my life. We continued to go to church, and during a summer VBS, my younger brother came to know the Lord. So I always call it a household, one of those household, what is the word? Salvation moments, that's the word.
Conversion?
Yeah, like an Acts. You know how they all came to Christ within a very short period of time. So
that's awesome. So you became a Christian around, do you say you were around 10? 10 years old. Okay, so then from 10, let's fast forward the time frame a little bit, because we mentioned before we came on the episode that we're going to talk about, really focus on your time as a pastor's wife. But how did you end up in the role of a pastor's wife? Where did you meet your pastor husband, a.k.a. my father? I'm pretty sure.
Yes, definitely.
So where did you meet Dad? What led you all into pastoral ministry? What did that look like?
Okay, this girl from Maine went to New Brunswick, and believe it or not, this boy from Kentucky landed at New Brunswick at New Brunswick Bible Institute, and there is where we found each other, discovered each other, and we were there 2 years. Then we got married and immediately went into the ministry. My husband had been, during his Bible school years, preaching at this little church that they didn't have money enough to pay anybody, so the school provided it. But we decided together that that's where we were going to go, and whatever came in the offering, that's what we'd live on, and that's what launched our pastor and Mrs. Pastor experience.
So that's the beginning of your journey as a pastor's wife, and that went on. How many years were you a pastor's wife officially?
You trying to find out my age? It's been actually 30 plus years.
Wow, that's incredible. Okay, so one of the parts of your story that I'm aware of, and what I thought would be really powerful to kind of talk about, and I don't know if saying I'm proud of my mom sounds corny, but I was proud of you for being willing to talk about it, because I think it can be a very vulnerable subject, but also I know from experience, and you will mention that this is a hereditary struggle, that in Christian circles especially, people have very mixed feelings and opinions in the area of mental illness, especially in regards to people who claim to have a relationship with Jesus and do have a relationship with Jesus, but it can be all over the map, kind of where people land with this. So would you share with our listeners just a little bit of your own battles, things that you wrestled? Maybe let's start with when you first maybe realized that you wrestled with mental illness, depression, whatever the most comfortable way for you to say it is, where that began in your life, and then we can go on from there as far as its impact in your ministry.
Okay. It was when we actually moved to Canada. It was the first time. I had had some slight indication of it, but wasn't sure what was going on. I did know that in my dad's side of the family that there was a lot of it, and I jokingly said, Dad, thanks for the inheritance. But anyways, I began to notice it then, and like you said, that was when there wasn't a lot of books written about depression in the Christian realm. It was, in a lot of people's mind, couldn't be possible. If you're a Christian, you're supposed to have joy. There's no room in there for depression or anything. But, and I definitely had a good case of it, if there's such a thing as a good case of depression. I have had medication. I've been in hospitalized. I do need meds to this day. I'm taking medication for it. And that's the way my depression acted. Not everybody's depression even shows itself in the same way or is to the same degree. But that's what mine has been.
What are some of you mentioned different people's depression shows up different ways. What were your symptoms or signs when you knew, okay, this is more than just a bad day, something's going on?
Yeah, I was homeschooling at the time, attempting to homeschool. We were at a new church, and I didn't have the energy. Everything became very overwhelming to the point where I actually broke down and said, take me to the hospital. I can't do this anymore. So it was, when it hit me hard. And because of history, it was pretty obvious that it was depression. I think I was in the hospital at least twice when we were there in Ontario. And you mentioned mental illness. That was one thing that was very hard for me when I heard that word. I have what? Depression, I could kind of take that word. But when, in one of my times in the hospital, when they mentioned and labeled it as mental illness, that was very scary. It brought on a lot of guilt. As far as in the ministry, I was active in the ministry to that point. And I would actually have to suddenly disappear, into my little house and into where I felt, I don't know if I felt safe, I just felt, And so that was very hard. And then the fact that we moved so much meant every time that I had an episode, it was a new group of people, it was a new situation. It was overwhelming and painful. And
so you mentioned that you were very active in the ministry, and that is definitely my memories of you, from playing the piano to leading music to Awana Commander. We definitely attended those. I want to say they're very known for New England church, even though we were technically in Ontario at the time. They weren't very large churches, so every person tended to do a lot of different roles, and you were no exception to that. You were very involved. How was your experience of the church's response, people within your faith communities, to when you described having to pull back, step back? And were you very open with them at the time? Were you using the language of depression, mental illness, or was it more of a, there's kind of that, hey, I'm stepping back for a rest. There's kind of that kinder language that avoids having to necessarily answer a lot of those questions?
I think that because of the severity of it, there was no kind way of putting it exactly. Of course, my husband was left out in the forefront. He couldn't pull back exactly from being a pastor, though he's always been very supportive as much as he could under the circumstances. So people, it depended. Like I said, back then it wasn't well understood by the church, even the medical community for that matter. So some people probably are still scratching their head wondering, who was that woman? And in fact, I had somebody in the final church that we left. She made some comment I never got to know you. That was whoa. We were there 8 years, and she's saying she didn't really know me. Anyways. So I do know that I was at a point where I was praying, Lord, I need one person that knows. And very definitely, in fact, she walked in my kitchen after I prayed that prayer. And I got attached to Kathy Hurst, and we were friends and still are friends. In fact, we joked about going to Tim Hortons and needing to rent the table because we spent a lot of time over coffee. And she had struggled with depression, so she really got it.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because I find, especially in the area of depression, the people that seem to just understand the most are those who've walked that same journey. And I love hearing the name Kathy Hurst, because as a daughter, I just have the fondest memories of this woman and your friendship with her and spending time at her house, and just what an incredible friend she was to you. I think that's such a gift. What are your memories, if you don't mind sharing? You don't obviously have to give names in this, but what were some of the harder responses of people from your church communities to your depression that were not necessarily as encouraging or supportive?
Well, definitely, and again, it was as we were leaving the church that one woman that looked at me that one day in passing. That particular time was probably one of the very low points in my life, because being a pastor's wife suddenly was ripped out from underneath me. In fact, I can see myself. I was sitting in the trailer across the road while Awana was going on, because I was at a point where I couldn't participate. And then Dad walking in and saying that we were no longer going to be in the ministry. So I see that as a difficult time, and how the people reacted to that was definitely all over the map. But there were people that, and again, it was people that understood, that were either they'd been there, they knew somebody else that had been there, and they understood what I was going through. And it also, on a side note, helped me minister to people that had been there, because I'd been there, done that. So.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, for you in this journey, and you mentioned this really began in Canada, or at least you really kind of noticed it. So I'm doing the timeline in my head. That would have put me in 4th grade. At that point, we had already moved. How many times? 1, 2, 3, at least 3 times in just my short lifespan. So there've been a few moves there. Are there things that you remember back on? Because I'm just thinking of women who might be listening, who maybe they just have a friend who really wrestles with this, who's walked this road, and they don't empathize necessarily, like they don't understand the struggle. But it's not that they don't want to love their friend through it. What were things that were really helpful for you? Things that people did or maybe did not do in some cases that you found, this was just really an encouragement to me. This was the right response in a difficult moment for you and maybe for them as well. So.
Well, maybe I haven't. A lot of people don't even know what you're going through. I mean, I was no hero. I never have been a hero in those moments. It was a very dark place, very lonely place. Actually, you start questioning God. You can't actually, sometimes you can't pray for yourself if somebody else doesn't pray for you. It's like, you're not going to make it. I think people were understanding enough to not throw themselves upon me when I couldn't take people, or they would maybe send me a card because I wasn't up to face, and many of them understood when I disappeared what was happening. I mean, after it happened a few times, they figured out, well, she really does live here. She just can't cope right now with anything, let alone ministry. The thought, that that particular thought. I didn't really like phone calls. Never have, anyway, no. But
That's fair.
yeah, I do now. I talk to my mother all the time. But again, I probably let the phone ring if it rang. And actually, in that church that I was talking about that we lost the ministry in, at one point the elders came up and they gathered around me and prayed.
Wow.
And you're thinking, yes, this is it. They've got whatever it takes. But as awkward as that might have felt for me, having a bunch of men around me with my husband and laying hands on me and praying, at that point I was ready for anything. And but it didn't work. That wasn't God's plan.
So this is going to be a hard place to go, mother-daughter talking, but there's the part of this that is, as a wife of a pastor, your husband is active in ministry. As you mentioned, there are seasons there where you're pulling back, but he's needing to stay there. But then there's the side of this as a mom who's walking through dealing with this. And you mentioned it, that you were homeschooling when all this first kind of shook down. What is it like as a mom, and how do you kind of process, or what goes through your mind, the wrestlings of when you just feel, and your words were spot on, that I cannot cope, but children are not so easy to pull back from as the church, because your safe place, your home, is filled with 5 children, and I remember my brothers well enough to know that there were often more than 5 children running around that place, and throw in a dog and a kitten and a bird and a mouse and all sorts of different critters that we like to collect. What was that journey like for you as a mom?
Again, it's bad enough to be guilty about the church, but when you cannot take care of your family, it is a hard place. One of my counselors said to me one time, he said, now imagine your life as a picture frame. Is everything in that picture that you ever thought would be? And that made me think, oh no, this is not what I signed up for. My dream, or aspiration, I guess I didn't shoot too high, but actually it is high, was to be a mom and to have kids. And I had the kids, and I was the mom. I never dreamed I wouldn't be able to cope with it, the day-to-day. And my mother was so gracious. She would come and help me sometime. Or I'd get shipped to her house even. And if I hadn't had a supportive husband, and not all husbands understand, it's just as foreign to them. If they don't struggle with it, they don't exactly understand. But yeah. My husband was and is very understanding and as helpful as he can be. So that carried me a long ways. But the kids, and the other guilt is that I have passed this on to some of my kids. Not only do I have the problem, but now I have to watch them have the problem. It's like, oh my goodness, I gave them the same inheritance.
Thanks for the inheritance, Mom.
Yeah, that's all you're getting.
That is not true. That's actually, let's pause on that point for a moment, because I think that's really important, is having a spouse that is supportive, and that is a great thing to say. But is there anything, maybe for spouses that are listening, that would be helpful for them? How does someone support their spouse that wrestles? Because I have seen both sides of this. I've seen husbands with mental illness who the wives are trying to figure out how am I supportive of my husband, and then vice versa, like your scenario. It's the wife that's wrestling, and now the husband's having. What are things that Dad has done along the way that have been helpful? And I'm sure, like any spouse, it's a growing, ongoing journey of, try and fail and sometimes succeed. But if you could, for a minute, just focus on some things along the way that he's done that has really made you feel, it's not that he's fixing you, but that you have felt supported.
Right. Well, when I looked at him one day and I said, I need to go to the hospital, he didn't try to talk me out of that. I mean, we probably drove fast.
It's like being in labor.
Yes, something like that. That's another story about you that we won't go into. But anyways, so he didn't negate what was happening within me. Obviously, I didn't understand it, so he wasn't going to have a full understanding. He helped me through the homeschool issue by we put you in a public school, which to me that was difficult. And actually, there were some repercussions that we won't go into on that too. It was not a good school situation, so that was. He's tried to explain it to the church as best he could. We were up front, or he was up front when I was hiding out. He was, sharing with where I am and what I can and cannot do right now. And for the most part, he took the pressure off me and allowed me the time to grieve. Practically speaking, he had a chair that went back, and I literally spent months just getting up and sitting in that chair. So he provided furniture for me because he went out and got his own because I was occupying. I think he went and got the recliner because I had the couch at that point.
You made it look so good. He had to get his own.
Yes, side by side. But so those are just some of the things that he's done.
No, that's good. So obviously you're my mom, so I can speak from a kid's perspective. You mentioned that, the wrestling of it's easy to remove yourself from the church, but then caring for your own family. And we'll put it out there that I am one of your offspring that have inherited this battle. I look back on this time, and I wasn't unaware that you were wrestling with these things. But I just have to say, from a daughter's perspective, and maybe this is just to speak to moms who their kids are younger and they don't know how this is going to land with their kids years later. But as a 33-year-old daughter now,
really?
I know
Baby?
I'm putting it out there. If Jenn was here, she would not let me say ages, but I'm just going to put it out there. 33. I am going to hold myself together to talk about this. I have memories of those seasons and the things, and I do think that this is the grace of God. The things that stand out to me as a kid were not that you were not caring for us, but was actually how hard you pressed into God's word in that time.
Yeah, it drove me.
Yeah, I remember that chair, but I don't remember it. And you're saying it, I'm like, I don't have many memories, if any, of you just sitting in the chair because you're not coping. But my memories of that chair were a very worn Bible next to it. And you always had one of those planner things, the journal / next to it, and then the daily bread. And more times than not, coming down those stairs and peeking around the corner, and that's where you were to be found, just in God's word. And I've said it when I've traveled and spoken, that I still to this day credit my love of God's word to you and the legacy that you've placed. So yes, I have inherited the joy of mental illness. But even in that, at this point, not that I would ever wish this on anyone. Like you, I worry about it for my own kids. I have younger kids, but man, when I see like the slightest ounce of anxiety or emotion, and I immediately go to, oh no, like they have it, I've ruined them. But then I have to remind myself that it hasn't ruined me. Like, it hasn't wrecked my life. It has definitely caused some very dark days. But I also know God differently because of that. His light has meant so much more to me, having faced the kind of darkness that I faced. And I guess in that instance, I'm grateful that you've given me that inheritance, because I think for me, at least, it's my depression and anxiety that keep me reliant on God. And I tell people it took me, I think, longer than you to embrace medication. I had a very hard time entering that. And I will be honest, some of it is, and maybe you can speak to that. Actually, let's speak to that. Medication is not like the next day fix.
No.
And I remember as a kid watching you sometimes had medication that worked, but then you've also had other experiences with that. And maybe you're willing to share that for women who maybe that's where they're in the middle of right now, is they're having meds adjusted or something is off. What was that like for you?
That's another very scary to me part of it, because the medication it reacts in your body differently. It depends on who you are. It's known to be a chemical problem. And when I first started with the depression, they would find a medication that worked, but then when I got feeling better, they'd take me off. And sometimes I would go back on that same medication and it wouldn't work. I mean, when you hear them say it takes 6 weeks or longer than that to even begin to see progress, and there are so many medications out there too, just to know where to. Even to this day, as you well know, this past year I've been struggling again. And they had taken me off medication, and now I have this. My Lazy Susan looks like a drugstore.
Mom's a drug pusher now.
Yes, I know. Anyways, so that's another whole aspect of it. The meds aren't going to cure you, and their degree of effectiveness is very different. It'll be different for anybody out there that is on that journey. You won't find the same thing works for you that works for me. So
it's very true. I know for myself, one of the things I learned was if it is something hereditary, it's helpful to talk to whomever you inherited from to get names of medications that have been helpful, because
right.
I entered the journey in December of one year when I started. My psychiatrist, a new psychiatrist, wanted to start me on some medication, and nothing was working at all. And she was upping them and changing them. And I came to the point, I think it was almost 10 months later, where I remember going into her office and thinking, I'm going in to tell this lady I am done. Like, this is
yeah.
Like, yes, depression sucks. And at that point I was having panic attacks and it was all horrible. But the stress of being on and off meds and the side effects were almost, to me, making it worse. Yeah. I got to this place where I'm like, I think I can handle depression at this point. Like, let's stop with the meds. And it was in that meeting that she asked me, have you ever considered, like, talking to your mom or your siblings, the brothers you have that have walked this journey, and what has been helpful for them? And I don't know why I'd never really thought about that before or taken note. I probably had the conversations and never thought twice about it, because you need to know going into medication, most of those things you can't pronounce. It's like
exactly
the opposite of what they teach you in nutrition, which is don't eat something if you can't pronounce the ingredient. Antidepressants are the opposite. Only take it if you cannot pronounce it. And I can't pronounce most of them. And so I went ahead, I talked to you, and one of my brothers had one in common. And so I went to her with that. And I remember her saying, like, I've been really leery to put you on this one. And she gave me the whys, like, here are the side effects. And we decided together that it was worth the risk. The side effects were ones that I was not high risk for, like seizures and things of that nature. I didn't have a history of that. So that's partially why she thought we can give it a try. And we did. And I am telling you, within that 6-week window, I had my eyes opened to a life I did not know existed. It made me wonder how many years I had depression, because you only know what you know. Yeah. And that, for me, I didn't realize that there was this such thing as not being in tears all the time or being way up or way down. And so that was kind of my journey. Similarly to you, was not every medication works the same. The top 3 meds that the psychiatrist finds the most success with had no positive impact on my body.
Yeah.
And lastly, talk to someone who shares your genes and just find out if it's something that they've walked through, what has worked for them, because that was really the deciding factor for me. And at least in my case, and this is not always true, that medicine has worked for me for the past 3 years. And
Yeah, I remembered something now that you're saying that. My mother, bless her soul, as she watched this and come and helped me, one day she wrote one of her notoriously Nana lists and she had listed every relative, every medicine they'd taken. If that wasn't scary.
Yikes.
Yikes. But again, I that was helpful, because if it worked in their situation, it could be that it would work for me. So in spite of that long list that was very scary, it was at least something.
Yeah. No, I think that's actually just good practical advice in it. Talk to people in your family history. And the other side is medicine is not for everyone either. And I've always appreciated that you were never pressuring me, because like I said, a number of years I was terrified of medication, and never did I feel like you were standing there like, well, you're never going to get better until you take the meds. Like, you were similar to your mom. You came and helped me, and you would stay with me. I have so many stories of calling you in tears, Mom, please come. And Dad probably hated me for it because I kept stealing you away. But you would just come, and whatever I was willing and able to do, you supported. And sometimes that was just take a few extra naps. Sometimes it was go away with your husband. I got your kids. And then eventually, years down the line, it was, okay, I think it's time to consider medication as an option. And so it's not that, and I love that you said it, medication isn't going to cure you. That's not necessarily the answer for everyone. For me, I find similarly nutrition and exercise, all of those things help. But at least in my case, and maybe you can attest to this, is there are certain dark days where, though you know in your mind the things that would help you, actually doing those things is like trying to climb Kilimanjaro without any exercise it's so overwhelming. And I had a friend that described it once, that antidepressants were not the cure to her depression, but it removed the fog in order for her to be able to do the things that helped her, which is, for her, was exercise and relationships, even being able to talk to her counselor. She first needed medication to help kind of clear her mind so she could have a conversation.
Exactly, right. Yeah, I'm not one to lay myself bare before anybody, but I do use a counselor. I even have a counselor I go to once a week here, and sometimes they're hard to find that you can really connect with, because I've had two recently that there was no connection, so I didn't feel like I was gaining anything, but God has brought into my life one now that really gets me talking and helps me feel like I'm not crazy. And so it's been very helpful that way. And she's not a Christian counselor. I mean, you can go to see a Christian counselor if you can find one, but just her expertise and knowing how to dig things out of me that otherwise I would leave hidden.
Yeah.
So.
And I think some people are afraid of non-Christian counselors.
Exactly. If you're a Christian, you think, well, they're not going to tell me about God, and I know He's important. And but there are other aspects of it that they can help you with a lot.
Well, I think we also forget that truth is truth, and there are things. Obviously, everything within the Bible is truth, but there are things that are not necessarily said in the Bible that are true, and that's not sacrilegious. It's just there are things that are true that you're not necessarily going to get a Bible verse to back you up on it, but it doesn't mean that it's not powerful truth.
Powerful
and
can help you.
Yeah, so finding the right counselor, I would describe it's as important as getting the right medication, because if just sitting in an office with somebody, which, by the way, I've yet to find one with a good leather couch. I feel like that cliche has totally been broken in my mind.
Yeah, they don't let you lay down or anything.
They do give you tissues. That is true. But just sitting in a room with them and someone that you're not connecting and that's not helpful. Like, you might as well, I don't even know, just go sit by your
lamp.
Yeah, for real. So yeah, that's something. And I have said, and it's probably a little bold to say this, but I still think that anybody in full-time ministry, regardless of your position, if that's what you do, should have a counselor. I think that should just be mandated. It doesn't matter if you have mental illness. It doesn't matter if you think you have stuff to talk about or not. I just think when you're, and maybe it's not just ministry, but any area where you are taking on things from people and you are in a position of like high trust, confidence, like, or confidentiality,
right,
that you need a safe place to process those things out loud, because you may not even be prone to depression and anxiety, but I guarantee you, if you listen to people's junk long enough and you just stuff that down, you are suddenly going to develop a case of anxiety and depression, because no human being is built, aside from Jesus Christ himself,
right, to carry that.
Yeah, to carry that. So, and I agree, there are not enough out there. So if you're listening and you're at all feeling that tug to go into schooling to become a counselor, please, yes, do it. We need more of you. So anything else, Mom, before we head to the end of this, something that you want to share? You have your adorable purple Bible.
I wonder why it's purple.
I love it. Mom's favorite color. Something you want to share with us before we shift to the end of this?
Yes, I again, at that lowest point, I can remember sitting in the trailer in my, I don't know what you call it, in my dark place. And one of the things I did, I don't even know how I had motivation to do it, but I was so desperate I was going to do something. And I memorized Psalm 139. And not that I can remember it all today, that's why I have my Bible, but just the fact that God knew me, he was aware of me. And then something you will like, because it talks about something you've been learning lately, is, and if I say, surely the darkness will hide me and the light around me will be night, even the darkness is not dark to you. So those dark places weren't dark to him. The night shines like the day. And then this little phrase, you knit me together. I think I wrote in my Bible, I'm his knitting project. And he doesn't drop a stitch. I don't knit very well, but anyways. And all my days are written in his book and planned before a single one of them. So God didn't make a mistake when he made me the way I am, and I inherited what I did. And he was, and when I couldn't see him, he saw me just as if I was shining. A light was shining down on me. I wasn't alone over there and in the dark, although you feel much alone.
I think that's a really good place for us to leave that in, just that truth from God's word. And thank you a lot, Mom, for sharing with us today and for being real and not afraid to talk about the hard things. I was
afraid. I'm about to have an anxiety attack. We better get off here.
This is where I say courage is not the absence of fear.
Yes.
Well, thank you for stepping in.
Yes.
Fear and trepidation and being honest. I know that this will not only bless people and encourage them, but I think there will be women out there that this will be freedom for them.
Right.
So thank you.
You're welcome.
And I love you.
And thank you for the coffee.
All right, girls, I'm back. It's Jenn, and Bethany's sitting here with me, and we're just kind of debriefing a little after that interview. So, Bethany, what are your thoughts and feelings after interviewing your mom?
A lot of thoughts and a lot of feelings. First of all, love my mom, and always love my mom, but I feel like when I get the chance to have like really good conversations with her, I'm just reminded of the reasons I love her. And I feel like you guys got this really small glimpse into the woman that she is. And even that is enough to be so encouraging. So I have to say, coming out, I'm really proud of her because that stuff is not easy to talk about. And I just wrote like a really small piece on my blog about depression recently. And the conversations I've had since have been kind of a good slap in the face reminder of how hard they are to talk about, but also how freeing it is for other people when we have the courage to talk about it. So I'm really excited for people to hear from my mom. I'm really excited for what I know God's going to do amazing things through her courage. And you have to know, I don't know if it's going to come across in the podcast, but you have to know that my mom is not like a super bold, like in your face whatsoever. If anything, after you meet my mom and you've known me for a while, you're like, so like, where does your crazy come from? Because my mom is like the sweetest and just gentle and quiet and a good listener and all these things that I suck at. And I just said suck on an interview my mom's on. Oh, we weren't allowed to say that growing up.
No, that's a bad word.
Inappropriate. Maybe our producer will edit that for me. But I'm just pumped. I'm excited for people to hear it. I know God has great things. But more curious about you because, you know, this is your first time. You got to hear kind of part of her story. Thoughts?
Yeah, so I've known your mom as this gentle, quiet woman, always not knowing all this backstory. And another piece for me is that I don't have a lot of experience personally with mental illness and depression and all those things. So a couple of takeaways for me that were huge were the fact that she said medication doesn't always work. And I think that's so, or you have to find the right one, and that takes a lot of time. And I think there's so many people out there struggling with depression. One, they don't want to try medicine because that seems really scary. And then once you try one and it doesn't work, and then you try another one and it doesn't work, I'm just thinking and feeling for all those people who are trying those things, and that's got to be so hard. But once you do find the one that works, and I thought it was such great advice that you both shared about like talking with your family. If, you know, depression or mental illness runs in your family, what medications are people taking that have worked for them? And because chances are they may work for you, and which is the truth that you found. So I love that. And it like broke my heart just thinking about her as a pastor's wife and like dealing with this. And the thing I think that broke my heart the most was when she said she would leave church and she would go home just because she couldn't be at church, but going home didn't feel safe either. And not that she wasn't safe, but just all the things that she was feeling on the inside didn't feel good. And that broke my heart, and it just made me feel so much compassion and empathy for people who are going through these things and may not have even the words to say that, but are feeling so many of those feelings. So I appreciate her heart and her willingness to share all these things so much. And I hope and pray that God will use her story to help and encourage other women.
Absolutely. I think too, it's helpful for me to hear even you talk about it as someone who doesn't normally wrestle with it, because I come from a family where it's almost commonplace that you don't always have the perspective of somebody trying to learn to love and empathize from the outside. Because when you've never been an outsider, and that's weird, we talk a lot about, I want to understand how you're feeling. But then for somebody who wrestles with it, how do I communicate to people who don't in a way that helps them to love? Because I think there's a lot of people out there that really they want to love well, they want to support, they want to come alongside. But if you have no experience, that's such a hard thing, because depression, anxiety, bipolar, whatever it is, your instinct, the things you want to do to help are often the things that are like, oh, that's a really bad idea. And my mom mentioned it, like, who doesn't want to make a phone call? Like, I just want you to know. And she said, like, I just let the phone ring. Like, you don't want a phone call right then. And anxiety is the same for someone who wrestles with anxiety. I often think, like, your instinct is, okay, well, let's pinpoint what's making you anxious. And at least for me, when someone's like, well, let's figure out what it is, that's so much more. You're like, so I'm like, I don't know what it is. Like, and sometimes it's not something you can pinpoint. That's the point of it being a sickness. Like, you know what? I'm having an anxiety attack and I don't know why I'm having it. And someone trying to figure out why I'm having it is, if anything, just perpetuating the issue where I just, like my mom, I want to run to someplace safe. Like I don't have enough energy to breathe right now, let alone help you process with me why this is going on. So I don't know. I just appreciate hearing it. It makes me think, how do I communicate with clarity to people who just really desire to love people through that? And I'm just going to throw it out there. Any of you who may have listened and you're like, I just have all this great advice for your mom I'm just telling you right now, you better back off my mom. She had a lot of courage coming on this and sharing her heart. And if you've got negative feedback about your feelings about mental illness and people who are Christians, feel free to come and share all of that feedback with me. But if you go near my mother,
we will hurt you.
You're going to have a problem. I'm just throwing it out there for what it's worth. Maybe it's me, the protective side, but I just think she was brave. And
absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's awesome that she was brave. I think women are going to connect with this, and I think a lot of people have a lot of feelings on this, but share those feelings with us. Not
we'll filter
Melissa
them and decide what mom needs to hear or doesn't. All right, that's it for this episode. Well, that's it. That was a heavy episode. Honestly, a lot of feelings, but here's the thing, at least for me, I'm loving the feedback. I'm loving the notes, the Instagram messages, the Facebook messages, and we're just grateful for them. So keep it up.
Find us on Facebook, find us on Instagram, subscribe on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, whatever it is now, but like us either way. And those of you who give us 5 stars, crowns in heaven. We love you.
See ya. Hello.
You hear me now? You hear me now?
This is the intro for Melissa Blevins.
I'm your co-host, Jenn Parker.
No, you're the host. Stop it.
Okay. Yeah, but I'm not hosting this one.
You are the host.
Okay.
I refuse to let you take second chair.
It's
responsibility.
I'm holding my breath. Oh, I love these. I love the seltzers with the lemonades.
They're so good.
Anna thinks they're gross, and she's dumb.